Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Kate Brewster. She is the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute. She is a first-timer on the show, so I welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having me.
For those who are watching throughout the state of Rhode Island today and may not know, what is the Economic Progress Institute?
So we are a research and advocacy organization that works on behalf of low and modest income Rhode Islanders. We work on policies to make sure that Rhode Islanders can compete in today's economy, that they have the skills to compete. We want to make sure that for those who are working in low-wage jobs or are unable to work, that they're able to meet their basic needs. And we also try to make sure that the state has enough revenue or adequate revenue to be able to fund its vital public services. So we do a lot of work on tax and revenue policy.
What would you say is the state of Rhode Island at this point?
Well, you know, from our perspective, we're looking at how well families are doing, and some data just came out about poverty and people with health insurance or lacking health insurance. You know, the good news is poverty didn't go up last year. The bad news is it didn't go down either. So we've got, in Rhode Island, almost 14% of our population, which is close to 140,000 people who are living with income below the federal poverty level. Our unemployment rate is still one of the highest in the nation. Lots of folks still don't have insurance, so people really are struggling.
You know, you mentioned that poverty didn't go up, but it didn't go down, and we're supposedly supposed to be out of the recession by now. But one thing that I've noticed is, you know, really kind of straggling behind is like employers' willingness to rehire some of the people that they may have let go during the recession. That unemployment rate is still an issue, isn't it?
It really is. Rhode Island went into the recession early and has had a really hard time coming out. We're still behind tens of thousands of jobs from where we started before the recession. So, you know, one of the things that I find most fascinating is Rhode Island, of all the states in the country, since the early 90s, Rhode Island has lost the most manufacturing jobs as a share of its total employment in the country. So we're really, I think, trying to reinvent ourselves and figure out where do we go from here. We lost all those jewelry factories, so we're trying to rebuild ourselves.
And you can't bring them back because, I mean, the state of technology in general, just, you know, time marches on. So you probably won't be able to get them back. So like you said, you sort of have to reinvent yourself and maybe create a new industry and a new reason for people to come to Rhode Island to work and create industry.
Well, and I just want to mention not only technology, but trade policies. You know, many of those jobs have gone overseas. So yeah, there are some projections that manufacturing will grow a tiny bit over the next few years, but it will be in advanced manufacturing. So areas where people will need a lot more skill to be able to fill those jobs. So yes, we're trying to figure out where to go from here. There's a lot of focus on the meds and eds, but we also have a big growing service economy. And lots of those jobs are not paying wages that will support a family.
Yeah. What is the minimum wage now that people have to work with?
So in Rhode Island, interestingly, last year it went up. This past January, it was raised to $7.75. It had not been raised in 6 years prior to that. And this year, lawmakers again decided to bring it up to $8 an hour, beginning this coming January. So still, we know that you know, an individual needs at least $11 plus in Rhode Island to be able to meet their basic needs.
Yeah, and like 10 an hour is like maybe 20 grand a year or something like that. And that's pretty difficult to live on, you know, because prices for everything are.
I think in this area, you know, southern New England, housing alone is a very, very expensive.
How does Rhode Island compare with what you, from your perspective, and what you have to deal with your neighboring states, Connecticut, Massachusetts? How are you doing compared to them? Or is it kind of an all-encompassing thing because it's the Northeast?
I think that Rhode Island certainly is part of its neighboring economies, and we'll talk about that. I think the biggest difference that we're concerned about is the educational attainment of its residents. So when you look at Massachusetts and Connecticut, you all do a lot better than we do in terms of graduating people from high school and making sure that they're getting those higher degrees. And we think that's absolutely key. There was a study that just came out a few weeks ago that showed that states that have educated workforces have higher median wages and have more productive economies and more productive workforce. So it's just critical, and we're not as competitive as our two neighbors when it comes to education and skills.
The reason for that, you know, what about the size of Rhode Island? Is it advantageous for it, or is it a hindrance to get accomplished what you want to get accomplished, even with some of the things that you mentioned and everything else?
Well, I think you'll hear people say that, you know, the smallness of our state makes it a place where we should be able to experiment and be able to thrive. And you can easily go to the State House and talk to lawmakers.
It's not like
business.
Texas or something like that.
Businesses love that. But I do think that we're very small, and we can't be, luring big companies the way that some other states might be able to. So we have become very much part of, especially the Boston metro economy.
I want to bounce around a little bit because you mentioned this at the beginning. You were talking about health insurance and insurance in general, and it just so happens that we're taping the show on the first day of the Affordable Care Act, or as some people know it, Obamacare. How does that affect the people you work with on a regular basis? Will they see it as sort of a daunting task? What can you tell us about that?
So let me just start by saying the data from last year from the census tells us that about 15% of Rhode Islanders don't have health insurance who are under the age of 65. So
is that because their employers aren't offering it, or they just feel they can't afford it? Or?
I think we've got lots of people who are unemployed still, so they certainly don't have access. And I think over time we've just seen the costs going up. You hear from employers all the time they can't afford to keep up with that. So they're offering it less frequently, or they may be charging so much to their employees that they can't afford it.
Yeah.
So we've got 125,000 people who are under the age of 65 without insurance. This day is really, really important for those folks. And let me just give you some numbers. So the Affordable Care Act, one of the things that states could do was to expand the Medicaid program. Traditionally, single adults who didn't have children, who didn't have a disability, could not get free public health care. Today, people are able to enroll. The coverage won't start till January, but there is an estimated 44,000 Rhode Islanders, adults who don't have children, who are estimated to be eligible for Medicaid. So they earn less than $16,000 a year, and they'll be able to get free health care through this system. That's huge.
That's very huge. This is what they were not eligible for until today.
Until
January.
Until January. They can start to enroll today, go through what we have a new health insurance marketplace called Health Source RI. People can go to the website, punch in their information, and see if they're eligible. There are also another 45,000 individuals who might be part of families who earn less than 400% of the federal poverty level and maybe don't have access to insurance at work, who will be able to apply for federal tax credits, federal subsidies that will help them pay for insurance. So this is incredibly important for so many people in our state to be able to be insured, to be able to go to the doctor, many of whom probably have been avoiding doing that for a long time.
It's great that the opportunity is there, but I would imagine that there are some people, like I mentioned before, that will need a helping hand to kind of get through the process.
Oh yeah.
It's sort of a daunting task for them to just understand it. It's not designed to be complicated, but in some cases it'll end up being that
Listen,
way.
as a director of a small organization, I leave it to my health insurance broker. I just say, tell me what I should do. It's a complicated area. I think that there are a number of ways that people can get help doing this. So the system has been set up to help folks. First, they can do it themselves online and fill out an online application. And lots of data that you used to have to provide on paper, the government will now match with the IRS or Social Security. There's a call center that's open 7 days a week in Rhode Island that people can call and get help, or walk in and get help filling out the application. There are navigators in the community at different local community health centers, social service agencies who are there to help.
A navigator is just someone who assists you, correct?
Someone who knows maybe more than you do about the application and how to get through it. So there's lots and lots of assistance out there for people who want to look into this. I think, I shouldn't say this, but I'm hearing that lots of states have had millions of hits on their websites
Is it crash
this morning.
on their sites?
I think our site crashed for a couple minutes this morning, but it's back online. My own sister was looking to see what might be available for her. So I think it's really a very exciting day for many, many people.
So you mentioned your sister. This could be people of any walk of life or income level that might want to take a look at this and just see if there's something comparable to what they have now, or maybe even better.
Well, absolutely, and I failed to mention that employers also are going to be able to use this resource to purchase insurance or to help their employees. They might say, here's a certain amount of money that I'm willing to put up for you. You go and decide which health plan you want to buy with that. So lots of different options. My husband's a commercial fisherman in southern Rhode Island, and I'm sure that many of the guys down there will be eligible for either free or, tax credits for their families, and will be able to get help figuring out how to get through that system.
And you mentioned the employer aspect of it. Really, that part was kind of pushed back a little bit. Their obligation, depending on the size of the company, if they don't already offer
Right, they
their
can
employers,
wait.
they can wait a little bit.
Yeah, it was delayed. Some of the provisions were delayed, yes.
But so now this is the time. So I would assume that you would encourage people to maybe get a hold of you, or just begin the process of just starting to look into it now. Right?
Yeah, I think people who haven't had insurance, are feeling
anxious
are
to
going to
go.
be very anxious, and I think we've seen that with some of the numbers for folks who are visiting those sites today, for sure.
And we're at that time where let me ask you this question, and you don't have to answer it politically, but your opinion of the state of the restructuring of healthcare and what they're trying to do with it. Do you agree with it? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think we need to go in another direction? Or maybe do you just think that some kind of adjustment needs to be made in general to healthcare in this country?
Well, certainly the cost,
brutal.
is just going up tremendously. And I think that lots of folks would have liked to have actually seen more happen through healthcare reform, a single payer system. But this law does make a lot of adjustments that were very problematic for people. People couldn't get insurance if they had pre-existing conditions. That is now gone. That can't be a factor when you're enrolling. Children, or young adults who are coming out of college, maybe can't get a full-time job given our economy, they're now able to stay on their parents' health insurance through the age of 26. So I think those changes, combined with some of the expansions to Medicaid, the federal tax credits helping people pay. I think in Rhode Island, the hope is that through this program, people become more engaged in the healthcare debate and are going to take more ownership and understand things more clearly, and try to get them to have a say in how this all works.
Sure, and they can have a say with who they decide they want to, their constituents of their their lawmakers. You can
Right.
vote somebody out or vote somebody in if you disagree. If you understand it, you're more apt to go in there and pull the lever, for someone who might be an advocate in your corner,
Yeah,
so to speak.
and I should just mention one of the unfortunate things there were a lot of good things that happened in Rhode Island this year, and when it came to laws for low-income, moderate-income people. One of the unfortunate changes was that 7,000 parents who were enrolled in Medicaid with their children are going to be eliminated from that program in January. The hope is that they will then enroll in the exchange, but we're concerned about the cost for some of these folks who have much lower incomes. So we want to be ahead of that and making sure that those folks do understand what's coming, and there'll be a lot of outreach to that population.
Because
coming up.
Medicaid for them right now is free. If they enroll in one of these services, it will be a cost to them.
For some it was free, others
Yeah.
were paying maybe $60 a month, but their co-pays were covered. Now they're going to be asked to pay more, and they're going to have out-of-pocket costs. And for some of these people who are living at 1.5 times the federal poverty level, given the other costs that they're incurring in their lives, it's just not going to be something that's at the top of the priority list.
One other thing we should mention about the Affordable Care Act is you can't be turned down, right, for some kind of pre-existing condition with this. Whereas if you were the only other way you could not be turned down is if you were part of a group plan through your employer, right?
Right. So that's really important for people who are struggling with some kind of illness or have some condition.
So let's get back to the Economic Progress Institute and what else you'd like to talk about as far as people's ability to be able to reach out to you and some of the services that you offer.
Well, a lot of what we do, as I said, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of public education, and we do a lot of advocacy work. So I see in front of you.
Yes, this was sent to me just shortly before showtime, actually.
So that comes from our study, the Rhode Island Standard of Need. We look at what it costs to actually live in Rhode Island, and it's expensive. Connecticut, Massachusetts, we live in an expensive part of the country. And we look at that because we know that the federal poverty level is an inadequate and outdated measure of economic well-being.
It's completely an inaccurate way to see what the poverty, it's just wrong, right?
Well, it was developed in the 1960s, and it was based on the cost of food. And that's still how we're calculating how many people are living in poverty.
Why wouldn't that get updated? Why wouldn't that change since then?
Well, I think whoever flips that switch and there are some measures now that the federal government is beginning to look at that's a more realistic look that takes into account both regional costs. What you can get for a house for $200,000 here is a lot different than what you get in a southern state.
Right.
And it also looks at the value of things like SNAP benefits, formerly known as food stamps, like child care assistance. So it's more realistic. But I think whoever really says, here's what it really costs to live, and if you aren't earning that, you're struggling, is going to see the number of people living, quote unquote, on the fringe, go up dramatically. So I think there's probably some political fear in doing that. We know just from our study that if you're a single adult in Rhode Island, you need to earn about $24,000 a year to clear your basic expenses of just housing, food, transportation, and a few other items. The federal poverty level says you only need $11,000. So it's about twice that. And we do this because not only to show that there are many more people living in need, but also to show the value of some of those work supports. So we can actually say, if you get child care assistance and if you receive Medicaid, it does help your bottom line, and we try to make sure that lawmakers understand how important those programs are.
When somebody quotes their salary, the next question should be, well, where do you live?
Mm-hmm.
Because salary means nothing. Your salary, salary in New York City is a big difference from New Hampshire or something like that.
Right. There was just a report that came out. A group that we work with, Housing Works Rhode Island, just put out a housing fact book. And I believe, and I could get this a little bit wrong, but I think if you make $50,000 a year in Rhode Island, there are only 7 communities which are considered to be affordable to you, where you're not paying more than 30% of your income on housing. So it really is an expensive place to live. And with jobs that are growing that maybe aren't paying wages that, can sustain a family, we've got folks working, more than one job or going without.
And it's for some reason 50 seems to be a number that people like to throw out to determine whether a person is successful or just not successful. You got to make more than this much, less than 50, and you're not, whatever. But it's just an arbitrary number.
Yeah, our median household income is actually about $54,000 a year. It's higher in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
As far as the recession in general, not just Rhode Island, I know Rhode Island was kind of out in front on that. The housing market was the first to go. And so how is the housing market now in Rhode Island? And was that the first to kind of come back as an indicator that we were coming out of the recession nationally and also Rhode Island-wise?
So certainly, I think Rhode Island had seen its housing prices, skyrocket in the early part of the last decade. And we were one of the first to crash. Foreclosure rates are coming down, thank God, because we had one of the highest in the country. So that's really, really important. Housing prices are starting to climb back up. So there is some sense that things are getting better. But boy, did it take a plunge there. And we're still really feeling it. There are still way too many houses that have been foreclosed. We were seeing many multifamily properties being foreclosed on, and that was a huge problem, displacing 2 or 3 families at a time who were renting, potentially driving the homelessness rate up. So it had many rippling effects.
Yeah, because even renters had a problem, not just homeowners itself.
Exactly.
And what do you do? And how would you say it is now?
Well, I think, as I said, things are getting a little bit better. We know from that fact book and from regular reports that the foreclosure rate is coming down.
And I see one of the things on here, did lawmakers enact any policy changes that would kind of affect those low-income people, whether they, be renters or homeowners? And from what you were saying, we can just now see some improvement in it?
Yeah, so this year, in terms of housing, unfortunately, Rhode Island had been investing around $7 million at its high point in affordable housing creation and operation. The lawmakers have kind of gone back on that promise, and rather the state's been bonding some money for affordable housing, which can be expensive and isn't a permanent solution. This year they did decide to put some money up to renovate our homeless shelter in Rhode Island, the big one, which is not where we want to be necessarily investing. But they also did invest in rental subsidies for folks so they can, some number of families and individuals will better be able to afford housing. I just also want to mention that lawmakers did raise the minimum wage this year, which was very important, to $8 an hour coming in January. They also did something, they enacted temporary caregiver insurance. So this makes Rhode Island, I think, the 3rd state in the country that now is going to allow employees to take time off up to 4 weeks to care for a family member or a newborn child and receive pay, about 2/3 of their pay
So
for
that's
that.
not like maternity leave. That's separate. That's different.
Well,
right?
you know, there's the Family Medical Leave Act, which entitles you to leave if you're working for an employer with a certain number of employees, but there's no pay guarantee.
yeah.
So people who are very low, earn low wages, can't necessarily take any time off. And even if they have a week or two of vacation, you know, if someone really needs to take some extended time to, like I said, either care for a newborn child or a family member, this will now be a way that they can do that and be compensated. Employees will actually pay for it. They'll put more money into a temporary disability insurance fund that we have in Rhode Island, and be able to, as I said, take up to 4 weeks of leave.
So the
for that.
employers can't complain that they're paying for it because they're not really. It's the employees.
There were still some complaints, but for the most part, I
There's
think that
always gonna be,
there's
right?
Right. I think you know that I think any employee is who ends up needing to use this is gonna be extremely grateful that it's there for them.
Let's talk about something now where people probably aren't thinking about taxes yet, but you know, it's a fact of life every year. And talk about maybe some tax changes or anything like that in Rhode Island.
So, tax policy, that's what
Yeah.
makes us so popular.
Or not.
Or not,
Yeah.
right. So,
I saved this for last, by the
the
way.
Institute looks at tax policy through a couple of different lenses. We want to make sure that they're equitable and fair, especially to low-income people, and that they're adequate, and that we're raising enough money to provide the services everybody expects. So when we look at fairness, Rhode Island actually now is in the top 10 states that have the highest tax liabilities on the poor. So the poor people in our Rhode Island now taxes low-income people worst in the country, among the 10 worst states. That's kind of hard to say.
I know, and it's not a good stat to give
It's not a
either.
good stat. And what we know is that when you take the combined effect of state and local taxes, property sales, income, and a few others, low-income people, the lowest income people in our state pay about twice as much as the highest income people in our state. So, you know, most states have a regressive tax structure. So that's something that we're very concerned about. We also want to make sure that we're raising enough money, as I said, and we've, you know, cut taxes in many, many ways over the past couple of decades. And we're, you know, everybody likes to say that Rhode Island is a high tax state, but really when you look at individual taxes, whether it's the personal income, the sales, or corporate taxes, we rank in the middle or the lower part. When you look at rankings across the country, it's property taxes, which drive our average way up.
The mill rate of particular municipalities, depending on which one it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think property taxes in New England in general are incredibly out of whack when you look across the country. So that's where we get some of those high rankings when you average all those different types of taxes out. So we're also very concerned and want to make sure that if we do offer tax breaks, whether it's for industry or people, that they're actually done for a purpose and we're getting some kind of return. So this year, lawmakers we're very pleased to have seen them say that we're going to now start to evaluate, finally, the impact that some of the bigger tax breaks that we have given to businesses over the years have had.
Do you find lawmakers are more responsive now these days, more so? Are they more aware, and are they more open to you know, lobbying or just you know, people's complaints, if you want to call it that?
Well, I think
Or are their hands tied?
Well, I think when you look at Rhode Island and some of our bad recent experiences, you may have heard about 38 Studios,
Yeah, that was
Kurt
a
Schilling's
Schilling, yeah.
Company
That
that
was
went
just a
under.
bad investment, boy.
So,
you know?
so I think that that taxpayers are much more cognizant and aware of what is happening
And leery,
with those deals,
yeah.
and leery, and want to know what are the outcomes of these programs. So want to know whether we're getting a bang for our buck. Certainly in that case, we
There's
struck
more
out.
vetting that goes on. That was a good play on
Yeah.
words there, by the way. Also, you actually host your own show. It's like a public access show, right? And so what kind of guests do you have on your show, and what are you talking about on your show?
Well, last night we had one. We talked about affordable housing. We often have community leaders, sometimes lawmakers, who come in and generally talk about the issues that we care about, whether it's basic needs, housing, healthcare, food. We talk about tax policy frequently.
Do you throw hard questions at them? Do you really
Never.
grill them? No?
No.
Do you have like the light right on them and go, what happened the night of?
No, and I'm glad that you're not
Yeah,
doing that
not
to
me
either.
either, too. So how does it feel to be on the other side answering the questions for a change instead of asking them?
Well, it's always fun to to be on the other side.
You're very knowledgeable. Is there a website people can go to learn more?
Absolutely. It's www.economicprogressri.org.
What's on the website?
Lots of stuff.
Yeah,
And we
just
actually
go there,
Well,
right?
I will say that for people who are struggling and maybe need some help, not only do we have a lot of research, we also have a thing called the Guide to Assistance, and it lays out all of the eligibility rules and application procedures for all of the major programs that people can avail themselves of, whether it's SNAP, child care assistance, housing, help with housing. They can visit this website and see if I'm a family or I'm an individual, where might I be able to get some help? And you can kind of walk yourself through to see whether you might be qualified for those.
What are the day-to-day duties of the executive director of the Economic Progress Institute?
Well, I get to come on shows
so
like this.
So you're the PR person then, basically.
Well,
and get the
we're
word
all
out.
PR people.
We
You know,
are.
we're a small organization, so we all have a hand in everything. I do a lot of the administrative and
Wear
managerial
many hats,
work.
right?
Many hats. Do a lot of the work up at the State House. So that's what makes it fun. It's kind of a different thing every day.
And I'm sure you've had to tell your guests that we are out of time. And
It goes by fast.
Yeah, it does. It goes by fast. There's always so much more you can get to. Kate Brewster, the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute. Love to have you back.
Thank
Talk
you
about
very
more
much.
stuff.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of For the Record. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. In the meantime, I'm Sean Murphy. We will see you next time. Take care.